So yesterday I left you off with drilling the block out to a 1/2 inch feed line, and I felt that I probably had put a lot of work in for just going up a 1/16 of an inch. So later in the evening I snuck in here and I did I opened it all up to 9/16. Today we're going to chamfer, or well, radius to turns in there, and then polish the interior passage so that oil flows through it fairly easily and smoothly. When I did open it up to 9/16, I exhausted my inventory of WD-40, so there won't be any oiling mods in regards to the mains being drilled out or the oil feed line to the block being opened up. But that'll have to be at a later date. But today we get after it with a rotary tool. We polish the oil passage, and then we do some drain back procedures that improve drain back, hopefully significantly. I've been doing this a while, and you know, I've always seen that people focus on what the how much oil to give it, but I never see anybody focus on the drain back of the excess oil that you're putting in there. So that's what we're focused on today. So stay tuned. I'll flip the camera around and we'll get to work, and we'll get this block flowing oil to and from. Well, yesterday when we had left off, I had just finished up the 1/2 inch holes for the oil pickup and the suction side of the block. And today, you know, I actually felt a little ambitious last night after I finished cutting it to 1/2 inch. I thought, man, that's a lot of work for just virtually a 1/16 of an inch. So I ended up taking it out to 9/16 here on the suction side, and then also subsequently in the tube in the block. So I did take it out one size bigger. I figured that's probably better, and it wasn't getting overly ambitious, and I was being a little bit conservative, I think. So I did take it out, and things worked out just fine. Just like before, you just follow the piloted hole, and we already had a 1/2 inch hole drilled, so essentially I just followed it with a 9/16 drill bit on both sides, and now the passage is 9/16. The next thing I'm going to do today is going to be we're going to polish the inside of this of the oil passages here. So we're going to start here and work our way down. I'm going to try to radius that turn a little bit down there because it is a 90-degree turn, and but I don't want to get too carried away, I guess, because I don't want to get into this bolt hole for the motor mount and make the block weak. So the easiest thing to do is you start off with a 80 grit sanding roll, which you can see, you should be able to see here. It's just a sanding roll on a shank, long shank. And I made this shank, it's not quite centered, but I keep going through these things like mad. So when they break off, I ended up just welding them back together, or welding a couple of them together to make one. We're going to go ahead and get started and get it polished. I'll show you what it looks like after you clean it up and polish it. I'm not going to go too crazy with trying to radius this turn, like I said, and I'm just going to do it with a sanding roll. I'm not going to use a carbide burr to radius the turn. We got plenty of volume going on here for this virtually, it'd be a hot street engine, I guess. It will have the high compression pistons in it and a camshaft, but it won't be much more than that. So, all right, so one thing you do want to be leery of is if you get this thing at too sharp of an angle, your hardened steel shank will get into the block and it will cut the block fast. So be very careful not to hit the block with the shank on your rotary tool. Now I have turned the pressure down on this thing, so it's fairly lazy. I don't want to go too much, and the slower this thing goes, the slower it cuts. It already cuts slow anyway because it's just a sanding roll. But all we're trying to do right now is polish the interior of this to allow the oil to flow that much better through the block.
5 minutes later.
So there's my 80 grit sanding roll on the suction side, and we're going to switch on over to our I'd say these are probably 150 grit sanding rolls. So you can see here it's got a little bit less tooth than the other one, but it is going to smooth it out quite a bit.
5 minutes later.
All right, so that's about all it takes for your pickup side. Here, let me get you down there so you can actually see the interior of it. All right, so where are we at here? All right, so here's a flashlight. Let me swap. Okay. All right, so you can see the opening. It is 9/16. It's probably a little bit bigger now after I just did that, but you can see that the actual hole in the block is a lot smoother than what it normally is when it's just cast in there and drilled. Now it is opened up quite a bit compared to what it was from the factory. And I know it doesn't look quite round. It's actually just an optical illusion on this thing. Except for up at the top right corner, it is a little bit oblong, and that's because that's where I was trying to radius that turn. Okay, so it is a little oblong, and that way it's giving it a little bit less sharp of an angle to turn. It's no longer 90 degrees. It's probably 85 degrees or something to turn. So there's that for this side. Now we'll move on to the front of the block. Okay, and the front of the block again has been drilled to 9/16. I got a little ambitious after the video last night, and I went up to 9/16. But what I've done today is I've moved back to since I finished it up to 9/16 last night. I'm gonna go ahead and polish it some more, so that way the oil flow is a little bit better through this big long tube. It's gonna take considerably longer to do the big long one than it is the 3 inches in the block there for the oil pickup, but I went back to the 80 grit roll. So here we go, the 80 grit roll.
5 minutes later.
Okay, so we're moving on to the 120 grit roll. The shank came out of the tool, kind of giving me an indication of maybe I'm probably done with that one. I don't know. I'm just using it as an excuse. So here's 100, 120, 150, whatever the heck this one is. It's a lot finer.
5 minutes later.
You can actually see inside this sucker. All right, so that gives you a good idea of how smooth it is. The lightness won't travel all the way down. That's almost 14 inches. So you can see it's pretty smooth in there. And I still haven't cleaned anything out yet. I'll show you a good test here to see if you actually got into the block some, or into the motor mount bolt holes. There's an easy way to check that. There's a hole in the motor mount bolt holes. Like say you've broken through, you're gonna see some dust come out of those holes. And if not, I'll show you how I normally check it. But this is what I've noticed is every time that you go to clean this out, you'll see dust come out of these holes if you get into them. Now we're gonna find out. I don't feel anything coming out of those holes, so I'm assuming that we haven't got into them yet, so that's good. I am going to eventually get to the oil feed side. We're going to open that up to 9/16 as well, and I do that actually not really so much for oil flow because it has a considerable amount of oil flow at the moment compared to what it was from the factory, but it makes it easier to radius this turn. Because when you got the timing cover on here, it's making a 90-degree turn right here into the oil feed on the block, okay? And then it makes another 180-degree turn, or maybe even more than that, to go up through to the number 1 cam bearing. So what I like to do is I radius that turn and open it up a bit, but we're gonna have to go through here to the oil pressure sending unit hole. And we're going to open this up the next drill size, and then we'll open this up to 9/16, and then we'll radius that turn to make it a little bit better. But this is your basic big oiling mod that just about everybody should do on any performance V8 Buick. If it's, even if you're looking at, I want to go to the next step up above stock camshaft, you should probably be looking at this mod. The small block, I really believe that the oil passages in the 350 were originally designed around the 215, which the 215 mains are the smallest out of all of them. They're like 2¼ inch main, and it would require a lot less oil on that 2¼ inch main than it does this 3-inch main. The 300 has the same size, 7/16 oil feed hole. I'm assuming that's just the standard from the beginning when they started building the 215s. I don't know. I haven't opened up a 215 yet, but that's just my assumption. It may be even smaller on the 215. I don't necessarily know. Also, one thing that I was looking at yesterday that I hadn't discussed with you guys was your 3 center mains. This one here is a 5/16, and these are 1/4 inch. Okay, and here's where I completely disagree with the engineering behind the block. And this is why I open up the center 3 mains on the small block. It's almost imperative. If you look, you got number 1 main here is 3/8 of an inch. And I don't think you can even see it on camera. All right, so let me see here. All right, number 1 main is like 3/8 of an inch. It would be your 5th main, or your rear main would be 5/16. Then these 3 here in the center are 1/4 inch. The reason why I disagree with it so much is these 2 are the largest holes on the main system, on the main oiling system. So it feeds from here, from the main oil galley in the block to these holes here. And unfortunately, these holes only feed like 1 rod and 1 journal on the crank, 1 main journal, and then 1 rod. These here feed 2 rods and the main journal. So if any of them should be bigger, you would assume that it would be these 3, because they're actually feeding more bearing surface area. And this is probably why, if you look at a 455 Buick, if you've ever blown one up, they always seem to spin number 7 main, or number 7 rod, or this number 4 main gets really weak on oil. And I think a lot of it has to do with this as a factor. Right now, this hole being huge doesn't mean that it's expelling any more oil than any of these other ones, but because you put the bearing in here, and the bearing becomes a restriction on the backside, right? So it's only going to force however much oil is on. It can get through that number 1 main, the hole in the bearing. But these 3 is the ones I spend probably a majority of the time opening up, and I got a big long 5/16 drill bit that I take down in there. And they technically probably need to be bigger than that. I don't necessarily know. I've never had one after you open these up really come back. And if you do all the oiling mods on them, the oil pressure is generally really good. Not that it's super high or anything, but you notice it doesn't have the consistent Buick start them up 65 pounds of oil pressure. Once it gets warm, it's 25 pounds. And then once it starts to get up to the operating temperature of the thermostat, you're looking at 9 to 10 pounds. It's actually 7 to 10 would be fine for factory, but it doesn't have those characteristics. It maintains a much higher oil pressure at idle, and it seems like the heat doesn't affect it as much, because when you put a high volume, high pressure oil pump on there, and then you leave the pressure the same, it'll almost run the same pressure from startup to the time you shut it off. So this is how you even out the oil pressure on them. It doesn't hurt none either with a dual groove TA bearing in the number 1 cam bearing spot. But all of this builds on top of each other, so it takes a while to get this thing done. And you can see here that 7/16 hole is considerably bigger. That's my pinky finger all the way to the first knuckle. So it's considerably bigger than it was from the factory. So that means that all your gaskets, when you put them on, should be opened up. And your pickup tube, you might as well take the factory 7/16 pickup tube and throw it in the trash. You're going to need a later model V6 Buick, and then most likely you're probably going to have to try to chamfer this a little bit more so that the 5/8 transitions on there easily instead of having a big step. So But that's opening up today for just the main oil passage. Next, we're going to flip the block over, and I'm going to show you how to, improve the drain back, because drain back is probably just as important, if not more important, than the oil feed, because they kind of work together. You add more oil into the engine, it should be able to drain back better so that it refills the pan with that oil instead of sticking it all up top here and then and leaving it there. All right, you're gonna want your carbide burr. I use the Flame on these. You could probably use a couple of different ones, but this is the one I generally gravitate towards the most. But you're gonna use your carbide burr on your rotary tool. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean up all this extra flashing in here. These are notorious for having a ton of flashing. And the more flashing that you remove, the faster the oil drains back down the block into the pan. Okay, so we're gonna go through and we're gonna remove the flashing. You're gonna want goggles for this, or glasses or something.
5 minutes later.
All right, so I try not to take too much material off because it does add strength to this lifter valley area, which if you run high spring pressure, it will. The Buicks are kind of notorious for, it can break a lifter bore off. So I try to leave some of it in there for strength, especially if it looks like it's adding strength, but you just get the extra crap off so that it drains back that much quicker. All right, there is one spot here. I don't know if you can see it. It's where actually some of the oil drains back it'd be from your lifters, essentially in the timing chain cover area. It's always casted up, and I always just open it up to what it was supposed to be from the factory. All right, so here's the finished product. So, like I said, the oil drains back at the front and the rear of the head, the corners of the head. That's what this little indentation for is in the block, for the oil to drain back easily, right? But smoothing this out, all it does is make like a slip and slide for your motor oil, and it takes virtually minutes to do. It's nothing big, but returning the oil is just as important as providing more oil, because if it provides more oil and leaves the top end, there's no point in having any more oil in the engine if it doesn't return it as well. So you have to look at it as a balancing act between the two. So hopefully you got something out of today's video. Tomorrow we should have some WD, and I can continue on modifying this time the oil passage that feeds the block. So we're gonna do this one, and we'll probably get the mains done as well. So I'll show you how to do those. Until tomorrow, I'll see you later.